Assalamu alaikum. Today we'll continue with the topic of T.S. Eliot. Alright. So far we've seen a brief introduction of Eliot's role in modern criticism, and then a few of his critical works, and his classicism, as in how he tends to follow the classical writers, especially the classical critics, and what he considers true criticism, the kind of criticism that is disinterested exercise of intelligence. He calls true criticism. As far as his historical sense is concerned, he is a strong adherent of tradition. You need to remember that he lays much stock by history, the tradition behind every writer, because that's what he carries forward in his works. And he is not entirely opposed to the idea of individuality, that is, a person's self-expression, but at the same time he feels any individual cannot exist in isolation. He feels that an individual can write or express only what he has learned or how he has been conditioned by the tradition he belongs to. Okay, the tradition of his country, or whether the tradition of his time, or of his country or region or language or whatever it is. Okay. And speaking of it, he carries forward the argument, insisting on a certain depersonalization necessary for a poet to in his work. Okay, so when a poet brings out his work, any kind of poetry, when he writes any kind of poetry, he obviously has to feel and think, but then the thoughts and the feelings of the poet have to be channeled in such a way that he himself distances himself away from his work. Okay, so the end product should not contain any element of the writer himself. Okay, so a sense of depersonalization is required to create a work of any magnitude. So in that context, he makes use of this example of platinum and sulfur and carbon dioxide, and how they seem to excuse me. Yeah, so how a mixture of sulfur and carbon dioxide results in a sulfurous acid, but the element of platinum, which is used as a catalyst, remains same. So the platinum, the catalyst here in the production, in the creative process of writing, is the poet's mind. So it would remain unchanged according to T.S. Eliot. See, I'm very particular about using this word according to T.S. Eliot, because many tend to disagree with this concept. But nonetheless, it is a fascinating idea to be pondered upon. Okay. Now, yes, he is a little against the romantic theory of self-expression, as we have seen earlier. In Wordsworth, while dealing with Coleridge and Wordsworth, and we've spoken about Keats at some point as well. So for them, poetry is a sense of self-expression, a means of self-expression. So here Eliot opposes the idea, insisting that it is not a turning loose of emotion, but an escape from emotion. It is not an expression of personality, but an escape from personality. So the psychical distance he insists upon, T.S. Eliot insists upon, is considered quite often kind of anti-poetic coldness. Okay, because a poet has to feel, has to think and feel. He has to be intimately involved with his work, right? That's the general image of a poet. But here, his insistence upon this impersonality, this objectivity, has led to this coinage, to the coinage of this term, anti-poetic coldness. Okay. So, what is the function of criticism? While dealing with Matthew Arnold, we saw that the critic was invested with this major role of guiding and leading the writers. Right? So, according to Matthew Arnold, a critic served two purposes, dual purpose. One of telling the writer what to write, what kind of works to write, and the other would be to to tell the readers, to show the readers what kind of books to read. Okay, so that was the main function of criticism as far as Matthew Arnold is concerned. T.S. Eliot believes the function of criticism is to establish order. So fact is necessary for objective criticism, as opinion will be prejudiced. So your opinion, my opinion is bound to be prejudiced. I may dislike a great poet for some personal reasons. At the same time, an insignificant writer would be probably, in my estimate, would hold a great value. You never know. So opinion may differ, but facts are usually, most often, incontestable. Okay, facts cannot be contested, it cannot be argued against. So he says the main function of criticism is to establish order, to present facts for objective criticism. Okay, so it is necessary for objective criticism that you eschew any kind of opinion, because it's bound to be prejudiced. He practices evaluatory and judicial criticism. So Eliot initially believed in total autonomy of art. Later he defended aesthetic and moral and philosophical functions of art. So initially he believed that art should exist for its own sake, and it should be understood in isolation. It should not be judged on the basis of its social value or aesthetic value. I mean, aesthetic value, yes, not for social value that much, or its philosophical value for that much. So for Eliot, initially the idea was art should exist for its own sake. But later on, he defended aesthetic and moral and philosophical functions of art, considering that, yes, it does let you think, it lets you ponder. Finally, religion and literature were given equal importance. So religion and literature both were given equal importance at a much later stage. See, a person evolves over time. Every writer worth his salt has to change his mindset, constantly, or at least as and when required. So if it did not change, imagine it would be entirely stagnating. It would be a certain stagnation would occur, right? So he does tend to change his mind over time, his opinion over time, and finally he believed that religion and literature are both of equal importance. Now I want you to think back on Matthew Arnold, how he felt that literature could replace religion, because religion was at great peril of being lost. People were losing their faith, right? So he felt the need for literature to take the place of religion. But here T.S. Eliot, he was a firm believer as a Catholic. He felt that both religion and literature are of equal importance. So he turned from pure literary criticism to deep-seated concern with culture and civilization. So see, it was merely literature. Literature was his prime focus, but gradually his focus shifted and it turned towards culture and civilization. All right. Now, another famous slogan, you could call it slogan or phrase or coinage, what T.S. Eliot believes in, or felt or observed, is that he feels that there was a sense of dissociation of sensibility. Dissociation of sensibility as in thought and feeling were dissociated at some point, it seems. Okay, so because of this dissociation of sensibility, the quality of prose improved and the quality of poetry declined simultaneously. This seemed to have happened somewhere around the beginning of the 17th century. Okay, so in his Metaphysical Poets, Homage to Dryden, he writes, in the 17th century, a dissociation of sensibility set in, from which we have never recovered. Jacobean dramatists and metaphysical poets possessed a direct sensuous apprehension of thought or a recreation of thought into feeling. So he felt that there has been a sort of dissociation of thought and feeling, and this thought could not be converted into feeling or recreated into feeling. Okay, so these thoughts could not be captured immediately, and even if captured, they could not be turned into feeling. So thought and feeling could not go together, could not go hand in hand. That's why he felt that there is a sense of dissociation. Okay, now for him, for Donne, for instance, thought was an experience. Okay, it modified his sensibility. It modified his sensibility as in whatever he thought, he experienced those thoughts, and these experiences turned, were felt. These thoughts were felt by him and experienced by him. So when a poet's mind is perfectly equipped for its work, it is constantly amalgamating disparate experiences. So when your mind, when the mind of the poet is, you know, uh, you know, performing at its best, it is, taking up disparate elements, and in separate elements from different streams. Okay, different streams, as in it does not require a natural setting or a romantic setting for poetry. All it could gain, it could gain its inspiration from just about anything, probably from the table and chair in front of you, or probably from a mobile phone, or from the fan on the ceiling, or from the roof on the top of your head, or just about anything. So you see, when you look at dance poetry, you would find the use of geographical phrases, or use of cartography, or sometimes even a flea, a mosquito provides inspiration for dance. So you see, a poet's mind at perfection, the highest performance, is bound to find inspiration just about anywhere, and it can amalgamate, that it can combine together disparate elements, separate elements from different streams. Okay, so the ordinary man's mind experience is chaotic, it's irregular, it's fragmentary. You and I, the kind of life we live, we tend to forget, we tend to not to feel, we tend not to be philosophical about just about anything. We tend to disregard some things as absolutely unnecessary, or of least significance, right? At the same time, so the latter, that is the ordinary man, he falls in love or reads Spinoza, and these two experiences have nothing to do with each other, or with the noise of the typewriter, or the smell of cooking. In the mind of the poet, these experiences are forming new wholes. So in the mind of ordinary people, all the experiences are just experiences as such. They do not inspire, they do not conspire to create a new whole. Whereas the mind of a poet is always at work. It looks for just about anything, or it doesn't even look for it. Okay, looking is a conscious act, right? A deliberate act. No, it does not even look for elements, different elements or different ideas. It just feels, it just apprehends everything, whatever he is surrounded by, probably the whistle of the cooker, or the noise of a typewriter, or the ringing of a bell somewhere, or probably the chirping of a bird, or the just about anything, all these disparate, or even the smell of something lovely being cooked, all of it turns into poetry. All of it is amalgamated in the mind of a poet. Okay, so the unification of sensibility results in fusion of emotions with intellect. Okay, a fusion of emotion with intellect, in the sense the thought with feeling. So so your intellectual ability is increased manifold when there is a unification of sensibility. So excuse me. Ratiocination gave to reflection and rumination, as in, see, in the case of Milton, for instance. Okay, I keep going back to Milton all the time, I don't know why, but see, in the case of some of the poets of the 17th century, you would find that there is a kind of a separateness. Thought and feeling don't seem to go hand in hand. There is a kind of coldness to it. So they are more logical, they are more rational, but then this rationality, this gave way to reflection gradually in around the time of the neoclassical age, after towards the the pre-romantics. So they turned towards reflection and rumination. So while Keats and Shelley reflected, Tennyson and Browning ruminated. Okay, so see, there is a fine line dividing what is it, ratiocination and rumination and reflection. All right. With scientific rationalism, poets only thought. Okay. So what happens is that when you are overdosed with all these scientific theories, the new theories that you are encountering each and every day, you try to become as rational as you can. You move away from all sentimentality. You become so rational that ultimately the height of rationality excuse me, the height of rationality is the point where you become so objective and so cold that any sense of warmth is lost. Okay. Again, after romantic revolution, poets only felt as in they tend to excuse me. So after romantic revolution, again there is a kind of dissociation occurring wherein only feelings are espoused. As in the romantic writers, they were concerned after romanticism. It was like only feeling is given prominence. There is no rationality to it. Everything abstract is excuse me, all abstract ideas, images are given prominence, they are given significance. So Eliot finally pleads for a reintegration of thought and feeling. Thought and feeling seem to be finally a sort of demand is made by Eliot for a reintegration of thought and feeling. All right. So as far as Eliot's theories for poetic appreciation is concerned, we've just listed out a few here. There are a couple more, but for the subject of your study, this ought to be enough. I mean, if you can go for further study if you want, but these are really important theories that you need to remember. The theory of impersonalization, that is the depersonalization theory, as we've discussed earlier. Unified sensibility, that is a dissociation of sensibility as it occurred in 17th century, and a gradual movement towards rationalism and ratiocination and rumination, reflection and rumination. So these steps you need to remember as far as the unification of sensibility is concerned, and then the perfection of the spoken idiom for poetry. So again, this is something somehow related to what the romantic poets suggested, especially Wordsworth, when he main concern was of poetic diction, right? So a little, since Eliot is more inclined towards following the classical writers, he does have a certain regard for the neoclassicists, wherein they had perfected a certain idiom for poetry. Now here Eliot demands for a spoken idiom for poetry. And the kind of language used for poetry during neoclassical period are vastly different. So just compare Pope's writing to that of Eliot's writing, probably Swinging Among Nightingale. You'll find a great deal of difference between the two works, though they are both great in some way or the other. Now, he also proposed a theory of objective correlative. Objective correlative, though, do not be scared by any of the terminology mentioned in any of the chapters, because they are very, very simple when understood. Okay, we'll talk about objective correlatives soon, I believe. No. Yeah, we do get to objective correlative at some point. So these are the basic theories of poetic appreciation according to Eliot. Now, initially, Eliot approved of judicial and interpretative criticism. So, see, judicial or interpretative criticism would be how you tend to interpret poetry, and based on it, you judge the poetry, the quality of its, the quality of any poetry based on its meaning or how it is understood, right? He says, but later on he said, interpretation is valid only when it is not interpretation at all, but merely putting reader in possession of facts which he would otherwise have missed. So when we speak of interpretation, it's not merely paraphrasing of a certain text. Okay, so as far as most people, the common trend is that when you interpret something, you devise a paraphrase, or you prepare a summary of the original work. So that is not interpretative criticism. To him, interpretative criticism is something that has to point out things, point out paths that may otherwise be missed by an ordinary reader, by a common reader. Okay? So, putting in possession of facts which he would otherwise have missed. A critic must simply educate. What is the function of a critic? It is to educate. The reader will form the correct judgment for himself. So, the critic is not supposed to be judgmental. He does not have the wherewithal, or even if he does have the wherewithal, he should not take up the role of judge, jury by himself. Alright? He has to simply supply the facts based on which the reader will judge for him or herself as to the quality of the work. Okay, so the criticism will be formed by the reader himself. A job of the critic is only to provide facts. Okay, so since overt interpretation kills the enjoyment of the poem, he calls them lemon squeezer school of criticism. See, this is what happens, most of the time when we read criticism or we tend to analyze certain work, we tend to lose any interest we may have had in that particular work. See, after probably reading the Woman in the Attic, a critical work written by, who was that? Okay, I don't remember. Probably Julia Kristeva. No, not Julia Kristeva. Someone else. Anyway, after reading that work, whatever feelings I had towards Jane Eyre, it completely transformed into disgust. See, whatever warm feelings I may have had towards Jane Eyre, and how I may have found her adventurous and very straightforward, and it seemed to be, at least in my growing years, Jane Eyre seemed to be the epitome of the most wonderful novel ever written. But after getting so many different ideas from different critics about that particular work, I may have lost any love I may have had for that particular work. So you see, excessive interpretation. Here he is speaking about overt interpretation, means open interpretation, extreme interpretation. Okay, instead of stating bare facts, it is necessary you hint at it. Okay, you hint at what may be the meaning of certain thing, a certain line, or what may be, a covert interpretation is necessary to retain the beauty of a certain work. Or else, what does he call them? The ones who go for excessive interpretation, he calls them the lemon squeezer school of criticism. Alright. Now, what is the aim of criticism? Well, we've spoken of the function of criticism. We're looking at the aim of criticism. The aim of criticism, according to T.S. Eliot, is the return to work of art with improved perception. So, the aim of criticism is to go back to reading or analyzing the work of art with a certain awareness. With a certain awareness, as in, it should improve, it should open your mind to understanding or appreciating that work well, that work better. Okay, that should be the aim of criticism. So he was interested in finding patterns in works of art and authors while transmuting private and personal experience into universal and impersonal. So he focused upon finding patterns. So you could say he set a sort of ground rule for structuralism as well. So instead of just looking at one particular work at one point, he found a certain series of patterns evident in each work, in different works. Okay, and he tried to put those personal experiences, these private and personal experiences, and made them universal, sort them in a pattern in the universal figure of each genre or each kind of writing. Okay, and made it more impersonal. So all great poetry has a universalizing of emotions, that is agreed. So whatever emotion that is projected in a particular poem, it is bound to be made to look universal. So it's as if it's not just meant for one particular set of people or one particular set of one particular community or society. It is made two seem timeless, beyond time and space, right? So while art emotion is complex and multi-layered, life emotion is simple and superficial. At least T.S. Eliot believes, he makes this contrast between art emotion and life emotion, where life emotion he considers simple and superficial. That just seems to pass on, and that just doesn't seem to go too deep. At the same time, they are less complex. The intensity of art emotion is far stronger than any life emotion, and hence its universal appeal. Sorry, I had to take that call. So, yes, he lays much stock by art emotion. So, if you are familiar with probably Oron Grecianon or Ozymandias, you can easily understand what we are talking about here. That life emotion is very transitory, whereas art emotion seems to survive long after life emotion is gone, right? So, well, this universal appeal of art is he stresses upon quite vehemently. Well, moving on to artness and greatness, Eliot wants criticism to evolve from a definite ethical and theological point. Okay, so definite ethical and theological point, as in art should not exist merely for its aesthetic purpose. It should go beyond, itself for a definite ethical reason. Okay, it should show you morals, it should show you ethics, it should give you the way of life, it should tell you what is right and wrong, right? It should help you discriminate, be a discriminating person, an individual who can be morally sound. Okay, morally sound as in the one with principles, who can adhere to his or her principles in the times of distress, right? From a theological point as well. See, I told you he is a confirmed Catholic, so he he lays much stock by his faith, his belief. So for him, literature is as important as religion itself is. So the greatness of literature cannot be determined by solely literary standards, though we must remember that whether it is literature or not can be determined solely by literary standards. You get my point? So whether or not it is literature can be assessed, can be figured out only by judging it from literary perspective, from a literary standpoint. But whether or not that literature is great literature, it has to go beyond its literary standards. Okay. So you see, the form defines, or the form decides whether it is art or not. All right, but it is the content that decides whether it is great art or not. All right, or otherwise, for that matter. So there is a big deal of difference between artness and greatness. Just because it is artistic, it does not mean that it could be great. So the greatness of any literary work, according to Eliot, depends solely on its content. How good it is, how morally sound it is, how ethical it is. It has to have an ethical point, it has to have a theological point to it. Unless and until it fulfills those criteria, it is worthless, despite it being beautiful art. Aesthetically it may be pleasing, but the content has to be sound. It has to give you some kind of moral perception. All right, so mature art. Okay, I'll stop here, and inshallah we'll continue in the next class. Thank you for your patient listening. Jazakallahu khair. Assalamu alaikum.